Welcome to Almost Awakened. I'm your host, Bill Reel. We explore human development here, spirituality, psychedelics, sexuality, and more. Our aim? Equipping you with tools for a fulfilling post-religious life. This is Almost Awakened. Welcome to another episode of Almost Awakened. I'm your host, Bill Reel. Grateful for the chance to sit down with you today. This is going to be the first in a long line of conversations that we will be having here on this podcast with folks that I deeply respect as having experienced the complexity of life and who I think have a perspective that has gained wisdom and experience that would make their perspective being shared with you valuable to helping each of you to kind of lean into what Richard Rohr calls the second half of life. And so, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest today, the Fresh King Benjamin. Ben, how are you?
Hey, Bill, I'm doing really great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that welcome, and I'm so tickled to be your first conversation.
Yeah, and you and I have known each other for several years now at this point. When I moved out here to Southern Utah, I met you right away and sat down at a group setting and had the chance to listen to you tell your story. And I found it deeply captivating. And that's been told in other places. So we're not going to do that necessarily here, other than sort of a brief mention. But before we jump into it, I'll give you a moment to give a brief bio about yourself. And then we'll talk a little bit about that upbringing so that folks can understand what kind of experiences you bring to this conversation table.
Awesome. So, just brief bio. I was born in Mormon polygamy. My parents and my family has been They've been Mormon for almost 200 years. They joined in 1835. In the early days of the church, they practiced polygamy. They didn't practice polygamy for a while with the LDS Church, and then my parents and grandparents left the LDS Church and joined what's called the AUB, or the Apostolic United Brethren. That's the sister wives family, sister wives sect. And yeah, I was born into that. I was undocumented. I was raised on a little, I call it a compound. It was like our family's ranch, and we didn't go to school. We were labor trafficked in their bakery instead. I ended up going to college when I was about 17 or 18 because my parents wanted me to become a lawyer so that they could so that I could protect them from the evil government. And while I was at college, I decided to join the LDS Church. And after a couple of years of being LDS, I deconstructed it entirely. And then that really threw me into what I would call a spiritual and healing journey, where I had to sort of grapple with what had happened to me, and that because some traumatic things happened. And when it was for God, it was okay. But as soon as it wasn't for God anymore, right? As soon as it was because of a lie that was told 200 years ago, my world kind of crumbled. And so I went to therapy. I went on a big journey. I had to make a couple of really big changes in my life because I'd sort of aligned and built my life under a misapprehension. And so I had to adjust that. And that lasted, I mean, I think you're always kind of in that, but that really lasted for about 7 years. And I feel like I'm now kind of just a couple of years ago coming out on the end of that. And part of what came out of that is that I made a career change, and now I'm a comedian. So I realized that there was a part of me that always wanted to be expressed, and it was performative, and it was comedic, and it was meaningful. And so I started doing, I kicked off that about 2 years ago, and I started headlining this year. And so I'm having it's like a new kind of thing that's sort of bursting onto the scene, and I'm very excited to be on that journey.
Yeah, fantastic. In my time knowing you, it's obvious immediately that you're very intelligent. You grow up in this system that doesn't really treasure intelligence. It really treasures loyalty and obedience. And as you pointed out, education's not even valued for the most part. The education that's given in these fundamentalist, polygamous Mormon groups is so limited. And yet somehow you shine through that to the point where your family and and the support of others outside of that are pushing for you to go to college. And I'm just curious, in systems like Mormonism, but even more fundamentalist Mormonism, how tricky of a walk that is for education, to be smart and to want to do something important with your life, something meaningful with your life, and
Mhm.
also the system's sort of reluctance to value education.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I would maybe just add a little another layer of nuance to that because I love the way that you said that the system doesn't value education, and it also values education differently for different people, right? So if you're male, you're more likely to get a good education than if you're female because
Mm,
as a
totally.
man you would need it, right? So it's really about the drive for education is really about utility. It's not about sort of expanding the individual. So it's not about helping you.
Well-being, contentment. It's really
Right.
how can you serve this
How
system
can you
to
serve this
protect us?
system?
Yeah.
And if you need to be a wife and a mother, you're going to be educated in the tasks of being a wife and a mother. And if you need to be a caretaker or a provider, you're going to be educated in that way. Um, but there's also this really, so I remember growing up, I've always been a smart kid. Like I learned how to read when I was very young, kind of from watching my mom teach my older brother how to read. I would sort of look over their shoulder. I don't ever remember learning how to read. Like I don't remember ever not knowing how to read. And so that was sort of my escape. And because the world that I grew up in was very chaotic and very traumatic, um, and because I was pretty good at dissociating, which I learned later is what I was doing, I was able to really get lost in a lot of books. And that it's like this virtuous spiral, right? The more you read, the more powerful reading is. And so I really have to give, and there was some resistance, right? My dad, for a while, he didn't want me to read anything that he hadn't read previously. And my dad he's not a reader. He doesn't really read very much. And so that would have really limited my ability to do that. And so I actually had, and then I also had my grandpa, my dad's dad, that was also where we lived. He was like very anti-education. Like he was like, we're just ranchers, we're just cowboys, and you never like he would make fun of, and I got made fun of a lot, right? For being the smart one, for thinking I was smart, all of that stuff. Um, and I think I really have to credit a couple of really powerful women in my life because they showed up in ways that sort of protected and assisted me in expanding and playing with my mind, and that ultimately is what saved me. And one of those women was my mom, and she kind of, when my dad tried to sort of put this wall and say I can't read anything that he hasn't read, she fought that. And she said, no, if we do that, then he's not here. He's going to be so bored. Like you're never going to be able to keep up. And then she would take me to the library and she would let me check out really any kind of books that I wanted. And so she was constantly kind of feeding that. And then the other person that really showed up for me in that way that I really loved, it was one of my grandmas, but it wasn't one of my birth grandmas. So my other mom's mom, who wasn't polygamist, she was just LDS. She lived in a town maybe 20 minutes from where we grew up, but she was such a lovely human, and she welcomed all of the grandchildren into her home, not just her daughter's kids. And so she treated me just like any of her actual grandkids. And she sort of noticed that I like to read, and so she fed me fantasy. And I think fantasy is such a great tool for expanding your mind. And she fed me all these really great fantasy books. And then when other members of the family, like my grandpa, would come at me or make fun of me for reading, she would defend me publicly. And I'm really grateful to both of those in my life, because I think that is what sort of provided the opportunity for me to just explore what my brain wanted to do. And that ultimately is what allowed me to kind of think my way out of two very dangerous cults.
Yeah, it almost always takes somebody to side with you, to be your advocate in some way, for you
Mhm.
to step outside of like the unhealthiness of an unhealthy system and to be able to kind of rise above it. And so kudos to the folks in your life that made that difference. I won't necessarily ask these questions in order, but I want to jump into uh, the first question, and
Good.
I want to set it up this way, which is, you know, you spent time in several unhealthy religious systems,
Mm-hmm.
all connected to Mormonism. I happen to have been a member of the LDS faith, but and it's bad enough. I can sit here and think about the tangible trauma and harshness of that experience at times. And I grew up in the softest version of Mormonism, right? Well, but outside the community of Christ, probably.
Yeah.
And
We're all a little jealous of the community of Christ.
yeah, yeah, they're not doing great in activity rates and growth, but they sure aren't
They're
traumatizing their
sure
members.
gentle.
Yeah, they're gentle. Gentle doesn't seem to work though. It's why these systems do so well that are unhealthy. But
Yeah.
one of the things that religion does is it binds together a community of people. It gives you easy access to people who, at least on the surface level, care about you,
Mm-hmm.
want to help you, serve you, can look out for your greater good. Religion is often filled with rituals and ceremonies, and those rituals and ceremonies tie us to the outside world. They connect us to our inner world. Religion really does serve an evolutionary process that is so crucial.
Yeah. And very powerful.
Yeah. And here we are, you and I and millions of others, deconstructing our religious beliefs, our religious system. And for the folks who do that, at least in the post-Mormon world, often end up in sort of atheism, which I, to some degree, you and I
Yeah.
both have ended up at. And when you let go of, if you choose to let go of ritual and ceremony completely, you sort of disconnect yourself from the larger world. And people tend to do that with various degrees of success. But it seems as though if we're going to have a society that's successful long into the future, and we humans connect with each other and we collaborate and we work together, there's still a need for myth, for ritual, and for ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts on taking that apart from your old system, trying moments of not having that, what you were missing, and maybe how you in the present moment have filled your life with something that connects to myth, ritual, and ceremony.
Yeah, I love that question, and that really that's going to allow me to kind of maybe share one of the most important journeys that I've been on, and really one of the most lovely, because so I leave Mormonism, and when you leave Mormonism, I think the one of the most powerful feelings that a lot of people feel is just this really deep sense of betrayal. Right? Just like, how could you lie to me in such a how dare you? Right? And when I experienced that, I felt it was like a bad breakup where it's really gnarly. And then afterwards you're like, do I really want to love again?
Yeah.
And so I kind of threw myself into sort of and I would just say it like an
I'm
atheist.
still pissed at my old girlfriend, by the way. I'm still pissed
Right.
at her.
Like, fuck. Like those
She
things
shit
hurt.
on me so many times. I gave her
Those
so
things
many chances to do the
hurt,
right thing.
man. So I went on. I was like, I'm just gonna be an atheist for a while, and I'm only going to accept things that I know are factually true, because I've spent
Yeah.
so much time. At this point when I left, I'd spent 25 years
Mm.
in a fantasy land. It was like I lived in I lived in a society that believed that the Lord of the Rings was actually actual history.
Yeah. Can
Right.
Bilbo Baggins ride a bicycle? Let's discuss that.
Right. Like, let's talk about that. So so I'm like, science is only real. So I got on this huge, I took a bunch of science courses from the great courses. I read a bunch. I read Carl Sagan. I read Neil deGrasse. I read as much as I possibly could to understand that world. And I did that for a number of years. There were probably 4 or 5 years where I was kind of on that kick. And two things happened. Number one, I loved it. Like, it felt like what it did is it grounded me. It gave me access to this other tool that humans had developed called science. And it showed me the way that the science tool worked. and it showed me what the science tool could do. And it made me fall in love with the science tool. The science tool, awesome. One of the coolest tools that humans have invented. And after a couple of years of exclusively using the science tool, I started to feel like my life felt a little bit sterile. Like it felt like my life was a white laboratory. And I want my life to be a little bit more magic than that. I want my life to be a little more messy than that. I want my life to be a little more human than that. And so I started to feel kind of like I would describe it as like an existential bummer. Like I want to be able to believe in myth and magic and feel those happy feelings that I felt in Mormonism, but I don't think that I can and be in integrity because it's not true, right? Because I'm on the science kick. And then I read *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, right? And you've read this book. And so the core premise of this book is that the thing that enabled humans to cooperate and thus win essentially the hominid battle. There were other hominids besides sapiens. We dominated them. And it's not because we kicked ass.
Yeah.
And it's not because we were smarter. It's not because we were more violent. It's not because we were bigger or stronger. It's actually because Harari claims it's because we were better at cooperating. We were better at working together. And then he goes and he asks the question, well, why? What was it about sapiens that allowed us to cooperate so powerfully? And he says his thesis is that it's myth. It's our ability to believe in things that are not true. So he asks, everyone loves to ask the question, what built the pyramids? Was it aliens? Was it humans? Da, 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 da. What built the pyramids was the belief that Pharaoh was God. Because if you get millions of humans to believe that Pharaoh is God, then they build fucking pyramids. That's what they do. And so I read that and I was like, oh, belief and myth is a human tool. It's a human tool just like science. And it's a human tool that's actually far older and more powerful than Mormonism, right? Belief has been around for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Mormonism's been around for 200 years. Mormonism is a piddly little thing compared to the power of human belief. And so I decided that I wanted to take belief back. Mormonism doesn't get to keep belief. Mormonism doesn't get to keep God. So then I had to start to ask myself, okay, well, what role does belief play in my life? And what I started to find was that there were things that I could believe that made my life better. So one example for that for me is a practice called Qigong. Qigong is a Chinese energetic practice, and it involves some physical movement, which is good for your body, and then some imaginative movement. So you imagine the chi moving through your body as you're doing these movements. And here's the thing about our brain that's kind of cool. When we imagine things, like have you ever imagined an argument with someone and it made you get like a little pit in your stomach? Right? We do this all the time. We imagine things and that creates our physical reality. We imagined that we could go to the moon and then we went to the moon. So what I realized is if I take back belief and I say, you don't get to tell me what I believe, belief is mine. Then I can then look around the world and I can say, what are the beliefs that I want to adopt into my life that are going to make me happy? And that opened up this amazing smorgasbord of human belief, because it turns out humans have been playing with belief for a really long time. And there are lots of really fascinating systems that if you encounter them mythically, like, and not that they have to be literally true, but are they useful tools for understanding a part of the world that we know is there? We know that there's something divine. We know that there's something a little bit that's bigger than us and outside of our comprehension. And we can't quite get science to talk about that yet. But we know that there's something there. And if we can have a language to talk about that, that is just belief, I think that's really powerful. But I think that we need to acknowledge that that's the conversation that we're having. So for me, belief starts to become dangerous when it begins to insist on being literally true. So Mormonism actually, I think, has a couple of really interesting beliefs within it that could be used mythically and creatively in really interesting ways. Like the idea that, they've sort of scrapped this, but this idea that the humans could become gods. I think that's a pretty interesting divine theological idea, and could actually help us have conversations around things like AI and expanding life and uploading consciousness, right? We actually need belief to help us have these conversations. So I sort of like intellectually reclaimed belief. And then when I intellectually reclaimed belief, I opened myself up to experientially connecting with belief. And what happened there is that I started going to places that felt like spiritual experiences. So for me, what that looked like was festivals, music, raves. I went to one. I still remember this. It was like this little house party. A friend of mine had brought this like this amazing like spiritual singer to come to the house, and she sang for us. And she's very new agey. She was a little weird. She told everyone that she was from Saturn and that she only drank air. And for about 5 minutes during the night, she had me convinced that I could also survive only on air, because she was pretty persuasive. But she started singing. And when she started singing, she had taken old Christian worship songs, and retooled them as sort of EDM spiritual ballads. And when I heard her sing, I felt this overwhelming sense of awe and worship in my body. And I was overcome. And I was like, oh my God, that is worship, what I'm feeling right now. And so I fell to my knees and I was sobbing, and I worshiped, because I saw something that was worthy of worship. And since then, I've realized that worship is a beautiful, oh my God, worship is such a beautiful human emotion. And it is so powerful and so fun to engage in that feeling when you find something that feels worthy of worship. And if you just open your eyes and look around our world, there are so many things that are worthy of our worship, just not Mormon God.
Yeah. I love it. A lot of things came up. I made a bunch of little notes here. I was in a conversation with a young guy last night. My wife had a coworker come over, and we just had an evening of good conversation. And we were talking about sort of the connection to sapiens, that other primates, orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, and all other animals too, for that matter, make noises.
Mm-hmm.
And those noises mean things. Like if you're in a society of silver or of gorillas, the silverback leader makes a grunt and everyone else knows he's pissed. So in a way, sounds having meaning is language.
Mm-hmm.
Something, though, made us sapiens different, where we suddenly had the thought of, if we could string multiple sounds together, we could convey not only an emotion or a simple idea, we could convey these complex ideas.
Yeah.
And right, it starts off as language, it turns into gossip, it turns into myth. Each one of those at various layers have crucial importance to the human species, which human species survive, us being humans, Homo sapiens, but all these other ones dying out, as you pointed out. You also talked about how you could have myths be useful but not be true. And my immediate thought was like superhero movies. When I go to see Spider-Man, I know Spider-Man's fiction. And you and I don't know how much you had a chance to watch television as a child, but I was inundated with cartoons and superheroes, even watching like WWF wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And Hulk Hogan's a good guy and the Iron Sheik's a bad guy. And I knew that wrestling wasn't real, and yet we use myth as obvious fiction all the time to tell us as humans what is good and bad behavior. We don't need myths to be true.
We don't need, and honestly, like some of the most powerful myths aren't true, right? Like Les Miserables, right? What a fantastic,
Mm.
beautiful myth about forgiveness and love and suffering, right? It's all made up. It's all made up, but
Mhm.
that doesn't matter. And so I really think that it is like, I feel like a duty as sort of a post-religious spiritual person to take belief back from religion. Belief and worship, they don't belong to religion. They belong to humanity. We
Mhm.
made that shit up. It's our toys, it's our tools, and what they've done, and this is what makes me like just like primally angry. I feel angry like going back to my caveman DNA, that some humans came in and said, "Hey, this thing that we all have and get and play with, we all know is pretend, we all know is play, we all know is imaginative and fun, that's ours now. And we get to tell you how to interact with it. And if you don't interact with it in the way that we tell you to, you are unrighteous, you are sinful, and you must feel shame and guilt until you repent."
Yeah.
Because that is an abuse of power. That is an abuse of a very natural human feeling, and it is evil. That's an
Yeah.
evil thing to do.
We'll get into psychedelics here later, but having had several experiences with conscious altering tools, ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, LSD, and I've done it in group settings, done it solo too, but group settings, not ayahuasca. I would never recommend anyone do ayahuasca alone.
By yourself.
but
Good
but
luck.
in these group settings, everybody takes a conscious altering tool. Everybody trips, right? Everybody goes off into some other planet. Essentially, they blast off, and you sort of all recognize that whatever crazy happens tonight, you're welcome to share your crazy. You don't have a right to impose to me that your crazy is true,
Right.
right? And it's where religion gets off track, and of course it does it on purpose because it gets it power and control, and it's able to manipulate for its own benefit and perpetuation. But the difference comes in is that when the shaman says, "Hey, everyone's going to blast off, go have an incredible experience. When you get done, let's talk about what you experienced, and let's allow the group to integrate that with their own inner world, what's true and what isn't." But no one here is going to tell someone else what is real or true. And where and that's spirituality to me, is when you get to dictate how the experiences you're having, what they mean.
Yeah.
And then where spirituality turns into religion is what you pointed out, which is when someone else comes along and says, "No, no, 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 no. I I hear you, but you don't get to say what this means. We're the authorities.
Right.
We're going to tell you what this means." And I found it deeply interesting that you jump back into what you sort of call, and I'll call it something different here, pseudo ritual, which
Mhm.
is you put yourself in experiences where you get to feel the same things that were felt from a religious community,
Yeah.
but it is happening in spaces that are completely safe for you to have your own experience. Going to a concert, for instance.
Yep. And maybe if I could even just lean into it a little bit more, not only the same experiences that I had in religion, but the experiences that I always wanted to have in religion and never did. Because I think
Yeah.
that the dirty, ugly truth at the heart of Mormonism and at the heart of most religions is that everyone there is not experiencing the kinds of experiences that they want. Right?
Mm,
I remember feeling profoundly disappointed spiritually as a Mormon with
mm,
every step up. Going to the temple was supposed to be endowed with power from on high, deeply insightful, transcendent, and I think I fucked up that word, whatever that word is. And like it wasn't. It was confusing, it was scary, and it was weird. And
mm,
so one of the things that, because one of the things I'm the most excited about having stepped down now and kind of played in the wicked world for a little bit, is now I've started to find experiences that are giving me that sense of awe and wonder and meaning and purpose that I always wanted to have in religion, but never did.
mm, mm. Totally. Totally. Um, let's jump to the next question, which you mentioned earlier, that when you stepped out of religion, you deconstructed, you took on science as kind of the lens you would see through if it wasn't tangible, and you knocked on the table
Yeah.
and you said, if it's not like this table, then I'm just not going to buy into it. And then you talk about how as you move forward, you start to sort of insert yourself into spaces that are back at least open to some mystery. And one of the questions we wanted to talk about today was your thoughts on the nature of reality and consciousness. Because as you were saying, I stepped out of religion and I wanted to know what was tangible,
Yeah.
like the table. It reminded me of folks like Donald Hoffman, if you're familiar with him at all. But you can certainly relate to some of this stuff that's coming out on the front end of quantum mechanics as we're
Totally.
beginning to get into that,
Yeah.
where having an observer changes reality, which makes no sense.
Yeah.
And there's these debates with Neil deGrasse Tyson about whether we're in a simulation, and he says it's 50-50, I think is what he says.
Yeah.
And guys, and again, maybe you're not familiar with, but Donald Hoffman says, and other scientists are saying, you can Google it now, and it's in the scientific magazines, it's in the national news and periodicals covering it. But it's this idea, the argument right now is whether time and space are fundamental or not to the universe. And there are scientists on the front end saying time and space is not fundamental to the universe. And then in the same conversation, or at least right next to it, there are serious scientists who are taken seriously by the scientific community who are making the argument that consciousness might be the thing that's fundamental to the universe.
Interesting.
And so even as you knock on the table, and I'll say this too, and I've said it before in another episode, Donald Hoffman and others make the argument that our eyes are like a VR headset. And we all grasp it. We think we're seeing the world as it is.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
But we also intuitively recognize that dogs see the world differently. They pick up things that we don't, and they don't see things that we do.
Mhm.
Right? We sense that cats do it differently. We sense that trees are taking in sensory information about the world around them differently. Mycelium and magic mushrooms and how they communicate with the forest floor. We sort of get, if we slow down and go like, maybe I don't see reality the way it is, we sense that I almost certainly see certain things about the world that other life forms don't, and I'm missing things about the world that other life forms do.
Mhm.
Your thoughts on like consciousness and reality,
Yeah.
and whether you can still go like, I can only count on the table.
Well,
Well, maybe the table is not even a table.
Well, and since, you know, as I've explored science, what I found is that we don't actually know how I'm able to knock on this table. Right? We don't know why.
Yeah.
Why do these atoms not just go through those atoms? We don't know that. Which
Yeah.
I think so there's so much to unpack there. I think the first thing that I want to say is that I think one of the most powerful gifts that a Mormon faith crisis gives you is the profound understanding that you can be 100% wrong
About things that you were 100% sure
right
of.
sure about, right. And that realization, oh my God, is it painful? Oh my God, does it hurt? And oh my God, am I grateful for it? Because what it means is I can be totally wrong. So now I just approach life softer, more gently. All of my opinions are loosely held, right? Because and what I really know is that we don't actually know. So I think that science can kind of, there are aspects of the science world that can get a little bit dogmatic, just like religion, where we do know. Anyone who says that they know doesn't know.
Right.
And here's what I think about reality.
Anybody who names it is missing it. Anybody who defines it is wrong.
We don't know. It is so much bigger. But couple thoughts. I think there are like eggs, right? So different layers of it. So like to the simulation idea. I think we are all living in a simulation of our own creation. Right? So if you imagine like this meat suit that I've got, it has to navigate a world that is uncertain and it does not know. And the only way that it can navigate it is through these things and this thing and this thing and this thing and then this and then feeling, right?
Mhm.
And so, and all of that is kind of messed up, right? If you actually look at the physiology of like your eye, for example, everything that you see is upside down and there's a hole in it, because in order functionally for the light to come through your iris, there's a part of you right here and right here that you don't see. And also it's upside down. And so
Yeah, by the way, to show that, they've done studies where they put goggles on you that turns the world upside down.
yeah,
And you put it on and the world is upside down. And if you wear those goggles nonstop, by day 4 or 5, the world turns back up again on its right side. Your brain is flipping things. Yes.
right. Which means that your brain is creating a simulation. And it is a simulation, right? It's a predictive simulation because all of your responses are like 0.06 seconds behind because of these stimulus, right? It takes a certain amount of time for sensory data to come into your system and then for your brain to process it. So not only are you in a simulation, you're in a predictive simulation, because the simulation isn't responding to what's happening because that would be too slow. It's responding what, based on previous experience and beliefs, it believes is going to happen, which is why I think, going back to our earlier conversation about myth as a human tool, that's why myth and belief, that's why I wanted to take belief back, is because my beliefs inform the simulation that I'm running. And so if I can have powerful beliefs, right? I know a guy who believes that if he wears blue every day, he'll be successful. That's bullshit. That's not a true thing. And the dude wears blue every single day and is wildly successful. Why?
Yeah.
Because he tricked his brain. And he said, brain, if I do this thing, then I'll be successful. And now he is.
So he puts his blue shirt on and he feels a fictional confidence that his day is going to go great. And that confidence over days, weeks, months, years translates to a different world showing up for him, unfolding in front of him than what it would have been. And just to speak really quick to your point, you're 100% right. The science shows that whatever it is, 300 milliseconds or whatever, your brain creates a projection of what that next moment is going to be. And you're actually living in the future projection of what your brain thinks is going to happen,
Yes.
rather than the world as it is. So when you step off of a curb and you don't quite catch your footing right because your brain told you that the difference in height was not what it actually was, it's only when the miscalculation is felt and observed by your brain and body that your brain recorrects and goes like, oh, no, there's a 3-inch difference there than what we thought.
Right.
It's
and those
quite
moments
crazy.
are horrifying, right? Those are neuroscientists call those prediction errors, right? And if you've ever done that, like when you go down the step and it's not, that's your whole, that's like a faith crisis. That's like a mini faith crisis, because your whole world,
oh yeah,
like, ah!
yeah.
And then you're like, oh,
That's
okay,
what happens.
now I'm back. Now I'm back into this. I'm back into this reality. So I think that's how we are experiencing reality personally.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about what's coming out around dimensions, and that what you said about time and space maybe not being the act, but consciousness being. That sounds really rad to me. I think it's really fascinating that that's coming out at the same time that the Pentagon is like, yeah, there are aliens here. They're actually interdimensional beings.
Isn't that crazy?
And we have biologics and we have aircraft, right? So I suspect that I suspect that that interdimensional travel is possible, that that there are more layers of realities on top of our own that are here that we just can't observe or interact with. And I even like believing in like interstellar travel. Like I would imagine, I would hope, like if I were to the belief that I like to play with is that life is a cosmic imperative, that wherever stars are, life thrives, right? Life just exists, and it continues to exist, and it continues to spread. And so I really hope that we are just enmeshed in this intergalactic reality that's just teeming with life. And I really think it would be cool if we could travel to those places. And I suspect that if we did, it probably wouldn't be through like space travel. It would probably be through interdimensional travel. The point isn't really to go out. The point is to kind of go in and then go through dimensions. I think you might be muted because I can't hear you.
Yeah, the scientists on the front end of this conversation are we all grew up watching Star Wars and Star Trek, and you think like I'll just get on a spaceship and fly through space, and uh, what is almost assuredly more likely is that and again, we're talking crazy here,
Yeah,
but we're not, because we are at a moment in time, as you point out, that the government, not just in the United States, but in other countries, is beginning to have conversations around how everybody has alien spacecraft. They're trying to reverse engineer the technology, and there's sort of a race going on behind the scenes to see who gets there first, because whoever does that rules this world.
totally.
Yep. And the argument from the scientist on the front end of this is that rather than thinking in terms of like Star Trek, you get on a ship and you fly through space, what they're saying actually happens is that um, time and space can be manipulated, can be bent. You
Mhm.
essentially wrap time and space on itself, and you can then go from point A to point B instantaneously.
Right, like that.
Yeah, and hence you don't have to worry about flying into stars or debris or asteroids or
Right, or it taking
satellites.
30,000 years to get somewhere.
Yeah,
So
instantaneous.
I'm excited about that. That makes me really happy,
And scared.
and kind of scared. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of a brave new world, right?
Yeah.
I also sort of think too, like I really on the nature of reality. I think that there are beings there are beings that are bigger than us that we've forgotten about, and we are and we're harming to our detriment. And let me explain what I mean by that. Um, I really love the way that the Greeks in ancient Greek mythology dealt with the natural world, because they would assign they would, if they're anthropomorphized, they would assign godlike identities to forces of nature like the sea or the rain, and one of them was Gaia, right? And I believe that Gaia is the sum total of life on Earth, right? It's all, if you imagine, if you think about like Earth isn't just a habitable planet, right? Earth didn't just, it's not just because Earth happened to exist where it is that Earth can be habitable. Life made it habitable, right? Life started deep down in our oceans, and it created a byproduct of oxygen that rose up and bubbled to the surface, which created an atmosphere that then plants could come out onto. And then those plants broke down the rocks up there into a dirt and a topsoil that allowed more complex plants to come. And that allowed more complex animals. And that eventually allowed us. So that is all one organism, right? That is one being that exists on our planet. And I like to call it Gaia, because that's a nice, cool Greek word. And I think that there's elements of reality that are that we really need to understand, that as humans, we have such a myopic view about what reality is, and it centers on us. And we are not the most important thing in creation. Gaia has cycled through hundreds and thousands of iterations of life, and she will cycle through us without batting an eyelash. She might be a little bit sad because I think that she does think that we're cute, but she will cycle through us just like she cycled through the dinosaurs, just like she cycled through thousands and millions of species on this planet. And I think that that makes me feel kind of humble and small, and it makes me feel really grateful to a being that's older and far more vast and so different from me, right? That's such a different being than I am, but it is a being, right? It does exist. And I think that, we've, as a species over the last 100 years, we've really, we have pissed her off, and she is not happy with us.
Yeah, we've gone from being just another species on this planet to sort of being like a virus or a plague, you know? Um, and I look at religion, Christianity in particular, has this narrative that when Christ came into the world and that we came into the world, and it sort of makes us separate from the world. But as you're pointing out, and I've said it a bunch on this podcast, people will know probably what I'm about to say, but Eckhart Tolle is saying like we are the universe expressing itself as a human for a little while.
Yeah.
It's this idea that we came out of the world.
Yes.
We are the world showing up as a different form of awareness, but we're still part of that same creature as you're pointing to. I think one of the harms that religion has done is that it's sabotaged the um, intrinsic wisdom that we sort of would have had if religion didn't sabotage us. Like we just
Yeah,
naturally
it
come
cut
to.
us off. It cut us off from our mother.
Mhm.
Our mother is the earth. That's where we, and I mean that very literally, right? Like
Mhm.
we crawled out of the dirt of this earth,
Yeah.
and we are crawling back into the dirt of this earth. And I think that if you really sit with that, right? Like I had a moment. I think we'll maybe talk about this a little bit later too, because we'll talk about ritual. But a big new ritual that and ceremony that I've introduced into my life is Burning Man. And when I was at Burning Man last year, I've gone 2 years now. When I was at Burning Man last year, I had this really profound moment of just sitting on the dirt of the playa, which is just it's the most bare, it's the most bare, sparse, like nothing's gone. It feels very temple-y, like temple-y in the best sense of strip away everything that doesn't matter so that you can see, right? And I'm sitting there in the dirt. I'm covered in dirt. I'm butt ass naked, and I'm just here with earth. And I'm like, oh my God, this earth is alive. Like it's alive, and I came from this earth, and my ancestors came from this earth. And for hundreds of thousands of years, this earth has been supporting and caring. And like we've been walking on this earth, and it's been holding us up. And then I just felt this overwhelming grief for what we've done to her, because she has been so generous and giving and loving. And we have raped her. We have exploited her with no thought to sustainability, with no thought to what she wants, with no thought to what future generations might need. We just looked at something and we said, that's awesome. I get to have all of it. And I think that was a mistake. And I think we're paying for that right now. I think that's why climate change is happening, is because that is what happens when you fuck with Gaia, is that Gaia is like, well, fuck you.
Yeah.
The world is
It,
now on
it,
fire.
yeah. It doesn't keep getting, it doesn't keep going along like the 1980s. That's for sure.
No.
In the early Christian narrative, there's this Garden of Eden story where the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, I'll say it that way. The tree of knowledge of good and evil sits in the middle of the garden, and Adam and Eve are told not to partake of it. And by the way, I resonate. I don't know what the original author meant, but I resonate deeply with this idea that fruit will change your consciousness when you partake of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I reach up and grab the fruit and I eat it, it is a conscious altering tool. It is a psychedelic drug of some sort. It changed Adam and Eve's awareness. Again, I don't believe the story to be literal, but it changed their awareness. It made them understand good from evil. It increased their ability to comprehend this complex world.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they took it, there's all the religious shame for doing so. Like, don't take the thing that wakes you up. Don't take the drug. Stay away. It's there. I put it there, but just it's not to be tampered with. I resonate a lot with that story in terms of psychedelics. I really think that religion was trying to scare the hell out of us in taking a conscious altering tool.
Yeah.
And you can sort of, make that connection. I'm sure you're familiar with Terence McKenna and the stoned ape theory.
Yeah.
When I did ayahuasca, I didn't know Terence McKenna. I didn't know the stoned ape theory. And for 5 hours, I experienced for the first time stoned ape theory under ayahuasca. It was shown to me. I shared the consciousness with a ancient ancestor primate. To me, it was visually an orangutan. Not an orangutan, sorry, a chimpanzee. And I was, and he was me. We were together that whole night. And
Ooh, that's so cool.
I woke up in the morning looking, and everybody that was in the group with us, as I'm telling them what I've learned this night, some of the folks were getting phones out and recording me talking, and they were just so interested in this concept. None of us had
Mhm.
heard of Terence McKenna before. I get up the next morning and I start looking up some of the ideas that I had invented in my head. And I learned that I wasn't the one who invented them; they were invented before me. And I struck me that Terence McKenna almost certainly learned the same information under a conscious altering experience as well, right?
Yeah.
Because he was famous for delving into psychedelics. I say all that to say, um, conscious altering tools seem to be deeply helpful to almost all of us. There are, and I want to preface this part of the conversation by saying that there are folks who are adversely affected by taking psychedelic substances and can even end up with serious mental breakdowns.
Mhm.
And so anyone thinking about or about to take conscious altering tools should really put a lot of time and energy into that. It may go well for 99% of people, but for the 1% it doesn't, it goes really bad. So I say all that to say psychedelics seem to be an incredible tool that the world is starting to soften up to and relinquish control of, and allowing us to interact with those things without being criminal, without
Mhm.
being taboo, without being judged or feeling shame. Your thoughts on conscious altering tools, on psychedelics, and your experience with those.
Yeah, I would just say first off that psychedelics saved my life. Like psychedelics
Mm,
enabled me to move through trauma and to understand generational patterns of trauma in like that. And
mm,
that was I was able to work through things that probably would have taken years in therapy to really uncover. I was able to just see it. And I think that that really is the power of psychedelics. And then I would also maybe I want to talk because I want to share some experiences on them, and I'd also
mm.
want to maybe just offer a frame for people as they're thinking about using, because again, these are tools, right? Humans make tools. That's what we do, and we're really fucking good at it. And psychedelics are a really, really powerful tool because they allow you to see. Again, we're going back to this simulation, right? We're living in a myth of our own creation, and psychedelics can come in and they can change the way that you see reality.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can take things back with you. Um, the
Mm,
caution that I would maybe just to add to yours, that some people, like definitely some people are adversely affected. And I would also say that you need to have psychedelics are what I would call like a peak experience, right? They're a big blowout, powerful, like if you do ayahuasca or LSD or magic mushrooms, you'll have a powerful experience. And that needs to be grounded with some kind of like reality, again, like
yeah.
based practice. So I'm doing, when I did psychedelics, I'm also doing therapy, right? And I'm doing therapy with a therapist who knows about psychedelics. Um, Often I'm working with someone, if I can, who's licensed for that, because these are powerful substances, and you've gotta honor them, right? You've got to respect what they can do, because if you don't, you can end up in a place that maybe you don't want to be in, or maybe you're not prepared for,
Mm,
right? I've had, I've never had what I would call a bad psychedelic trip, but
mm.
I have had some gnarly, awful, intense experiences on psychedelics. And for me, that was part of the point, because I was prepared, because I knew that I was going in to meet a shadow, or to face a dragon. And so rather than run away from that, I embraced it. And I was like, awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. Um, what do you got for me? Like, why are you in me? And then you can start to understand. And so, yeah, I think that psychedelics are just a really potent and powerful tool. And, one of the most powerful experiences that I think that I had on psychedelics, I was able to go to a really cool place. It was a forest, and there was a lot of kind of interconnected trees. And I did 8 grams of magic mushrooms. So I did a hero's dose. I did a shit
Heroes dose plus 3. Yeah.
plus
Okay.
a couple, and and it was wild. Like it I was looping, it threw me, it felt like a little kind of like a hard reset of my nervous system. And when I came, some people call that an ego death, right? When I came back online, suddenly what I saw was the ways in which my family's energy had been saying no to life for generations. And I chose to say yes.
Mm.
So my family had been like, I suddenly saw that there was all of this energy that wanted to come into me, that wanted to flow through me, that wanted to sustain me and give me everything that I needed, and then allow me to just spread that energy into the world. And I realized that I'd been saying no to a lot of that. And all I had to do was say yes. And that energy started to move through me again. And I mean, that's a realization that changed my life, right? It changed the way that I interact with my environment. It changed the way I interact with my family, with my children, with my friends, because I'm realizing, and it's almost hard to describe because it's not just an intellectual realization. It was also physical. I could feel physically in my body what being closed meant, what being in no meant, and I could feel physically what it meant to be open. And so I could actually practice then with closed and open, so I could start to develop a habit of being a little bit more open, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And when you do that, when you approach life more openly, all kinds of magic shit starts happening because other people have things to grab onto, right? Other people's energy can flow through you. You're approached because you're vibrant and you're alive. You're not like walking around like this, right? Which is kind of how we're taught to walk around as Mormons, is to be really closed because we don't want to be deceived and we don't want to be seduced and we don't want any of those bad things to happen.
And you got to put on the facade so that you look good, so that you set a good missionary example for that system. So you put your white shirt on, you put your tie, you put your dress,
right?
And you smile, but let's not let anybody into our real inner world.
But we're a shell, right?
Yeah.
We're a shell, and inside we're screaming, right? And so yeah, those are and then beyond that, it's really fun to get a little altered on some psychedelics and look at paintings because they do cool shit.
They breathe and move. Yeah.
They breathe and move. And then you're starting, and you're like, oh yeah, that's all of us, right? There's one of the things I really love about the psychedelic experience.
It's sort of everything sort of stays still and moves at the same time.
Yeah. And everything kind of softens, like all the edges get a little blurry. And that's why it's important to have good containers and good, someone who's leading it that's experienced, but because you want to make sure that everyone's safe. But having the edges of life sort of soften, what it shows you is that a lot of those edges, a lot of those boundaries we invented, and we could invent different edges and boundaries if we wanted to. So much of this world that we live in, like we're living in our own creative, like individual simulation. Collectively, we're all creating this simulation. And so much of that simulation is constructed. It's not real. We invent it because we all choose to believe it, right? And so the cool thing that psychedelics kind of does is it turns that off, and it says, it offers you this invitation, which is, what would you create here instead? And that is a really fun question to answer, because there's a lot about the world that could be better.
Yeah. Like there is progress, and the world in lots of ways is better than it was 25 years ago. And in other ways, it's worse. And the more awareness, and again, psychedelics, along the lines of what you said, psychedelics for me opened up awareness to parts of the outside world and inner world that either others had blinded me to, or that I had blinded myself to. And then I take these substances and, 45 minutes later, I'm forced to step outside my own way of seeing the world. And as you point, offered an invitation. I'm offered a chance to see the world not as the way I see the world.
Yeah.
And there's so many insights, so many
So
that,
many.
like you, they were, you said it saved your life. I wouldn't say it saved my life, but it drastically, significantly altered my life for the better.
Mm.
I could now begin to sense why I and why others in the outside world did the things they did, why they did them, why we are the way we are. You started off with the thing in the very first line of the podcast today where you said something about what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what the guy's last name is. His first name, I think, is Bruce, but he wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey. It might be Bruce Perry, but he wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey titled "What Happened to You?" Because often we see people do unhealthy things and we go, why did they do that? And the better question is, what happened to you? Because that explains why we are what we are, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
want to
and on
go
that,
ahead.
just another addition, right? Like another really powerful insight, right? To just kind of put some, because you can get lots of insights on psychedelics, and just maybe solidify that for the listeners. One of the insights another insight that was really powerful for me on that was the realization that I very vividly saw the cycles of generational trauma that existed in my family. And what that did is it did two things for me. Number one, it made it so easy to forgive all of the members of my family who had harmed me. Because I was
Right, because
like,
someone had harmed them,
because I
and
could
someone had harmed them,
I
and someone
could
had harmed
see
them.
that cycle.
Yeah.
And it was like not only was it, and it was almost like it's even, I don't know that forgive is the right word, because it's not. What I did is I was just like, oh, that wasn't about me.
Mm-mm.
That wasn't directed at me. That was this thing that went back like thousands of years, potentially working its way through my family line like that. Right. So it did that. It gave me this really profound sense of forgiveness. And it also strengthened my boundary against people who would do that to me. Because what that showed me is, oh my God, I totally get why you're doing that. I see where that's coming from. I have no personal animosity towards you. And there is no way in hell I'm going to accept that energy into my system. Because that is not mine. And that's not yours either. Right. So it simultaneously let me forgive people who had wronged me and put rock solid boundaries against those people to prevent them from harming me further. And to have those boundaries grounded, not in rage, not in like, I hate you, but grounded in, I will not allow you to inflict your bullshit generational pattern that's just churning inside of you onto me. Gross.
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
I love it. Let's talk about boundaries for a moment. It's been in the last 5 years that I've understood this same thing you're pointing to, which is trauma is inevitable. A woman giving birth to a child, both parties incur trauma. We can't get through this world without it. It simply is going to happen. The nature of survival and the chaos of this planet, even as much as we've done to sort of step off of the food chain, which I think is just so crazy on its own. But trauma is going to happen. And as you point out, if we go back far enough, and again, I know sometimes that certain species didn't live at the same time as others, but if we, as an analogy, if human beings go out one day to hunt and one of them has a really close call with a saber-toothed tiger, and he almost loses his life, and he gets back to the cave with his family, and he's got a short temper, and he hits his kid for mouthing off, whatever it is, as you point out, doesn't make it right, but you can start to sense how, going back far enough, we humans have felt things we didn't want to feel. We incurred things we did not want to incur. And our way of dealing with it is letting off that steam on the next person.
And that likely happened before humans had developed prefrontal cortexes to inhibit them from doing the thing that they're feeling. So it
Yeah, look at
probably
other
wasn't,
primates. Mhm.
it wasn't even like a thought. Like it was just like, I'm stressed. There was a tiger. Now I'm safe. Fuck you, kid.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is the most impersonal thing. And then, but then that fuck you, kid energy just keeps cycling through generations and generations and generations until my dad does it to me. And then I'm like, why did you do that to me? You didn't do that to me. That was done to Gorg 200,000 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that energy has to keep moving. It moves into us and then moves out of us, and
Yeah.
how
And
we
I,
handle that.
to me too, like I think that also that energy is physical, right? So I think that we actually carry in our bodies rage and pain and
Mhm.
sorrow
I can
going
feel it right
back
now.
generations, right?
Yeah.
So I think that as conscious, this is part of my spirituality too, right? As conscious adults, we have to find ways to purge that energy.
Yeah.
I think that psychedelics are actually a pretty great tool. Sometimes psychedelics can purge a lot of stuck energy. I also have this right here. This is my anger bag. This thing right here, my
Mm.
anger table and my anger bag. And I've got these sticks and it's a bag of rice. And I have a regular practice where I will beat the shit out of that bag and I will yell as loud as I can
Yeah.
because that energy's in me and it's got to move. It's got to come out. I'm carrying that for my ancestors. And if I don't purge that, it's going to come out in unconscious ways on people that I don't want it to come out on. And it's going to continue to cycle through our system.
Yeah, the act that you're doing, by the way, the act that you're doing, again, forget the story we have for it. It's the same sort of expression of energy as hitting somebody,
Right.
as arguing and screaming at somebody, as belittling someone,
Right.
except that you're exercising that energy in a way that doesn't hurt anyone.
Doesn't it it hurts that rice.
Hurts that rice.
And the other thing that I really like about it too, the energy really that's being exercised there is this energy going back to, we're kind of shifting into talking about boundaries. It's that energy of boundary, right? Because really the energy of Korg when he hit his kid, what Korg was really doing there is that he felt unsafe.
Mhm.
He felt so profoundly unsafe when that tiger jumped out at him. And so rage came up, but it wasn't quite, but that was still in there. And so the
Fight or
thing that
flight.
he pushed into his kid, what it was is a boundary that needed to be set, right? Because Korg almost got eaten by a tiger. That's a pretty fucking big deal.
Yeah.
And so what I've noticed as I've started doing this is that it's sort of this practice. It's actually expanded my ability to set boundaries, because if I can go ape shit, right, literally
And I
on
can, right?
this bag, and I
Yeah.
can go batshit crazy on this. I couldn't used to, because I was Mormon and I was all nice and I would never yell and I would never, no, I can go
Oh.
batshit motherfucking crazy on this bag. And what that means now is that now when I just say no in real life, that no has the weight of my crazy. So it's actually gotten me being able to purge the energy, that rage and that boundary energy, and to channel it and to practice it. It's made it so that it's really easy for me to set boundaries in my life, because I know there's literally that the realization that changed for me with boundaries was the realization that no one can force me to do anything that I don't want to do.
Mm.
Because I always have the option to go batshit crazy.
Right. That option is always on the table.
It's always
Right?
on the table.
Yeah.
And so what that means then, but I mean, with consequences, right? If I go
Yeah.
batshit crazy,
Totally.
there will be consequences. But that's a choice that I'm able to make. And so that means is now that I'm faced with this thing that I don't like, I have to make a choice. And the choice that I make is, okay, do I do this thing that I don't want to do? Do I go batshit crazy? Or is there somewhere in the middle where I can find something that works, right? Can I just not speak to this person anymore, right? Can I just block this person? Can I just tell this person verbally, I don't like it when you do this. It makes me feel this way. In the future, I would like you to do this, or I would have to do this, right? That's just setting a verbal boundary.
Mhm.
And so there's all of these really powerful ways that we can control our energy and control our space and dictate to people how they interact with us. But it sort of has to begin, I think, with a sense of I'm in charge of me and I get to decide what happens to me. I am a sovereign, powerful being, and nobody gets access to me. Nobody gets my time or my energy or my resources or my attention without my consent.
To hit on for a second, we'll continue here on boundaries, but to hit on for a second, you mentioned purging. In the ayahuasca experience I had, everybody was given a bucket, and everyone at one point or another in the night, and often most of us threw up often.
Yeah.
And they didn't call it throwing up. They didn't call it puking. They called it purging. And I distinctly remember that experience that night. And everyone else in that room would have told you the same thing. There were certain moments in the night where certain music played by the shaman called 4 or 5 people at a time in the room to throw up.
Interesting.
And I remember holding my bucket and I'm heaving into it. It's not pleasant. All of us, anytime you've had the flu or not feel good, you're throwing up. No one likes it. But there was a part of me that liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I was very in tune, and everyone else in the room was too, that this act of throwing up was getting rid of something that needed to be gotten rid of. And whether the purging literally was throwing up something or whether it was the brain telling the body, like, hey, we're letting this go.
Yeah.
And I can't even exactly tell you what it was I let go. I just know that from that moment forward, I've been a different human being with less shit inside stored up.
Totally.
I emptied the bowl out and I've started over, at least in part.
I think that we are carrying stuff in our bodies, literally. Like we know that we store trauma in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's a thing called generational trauma where it gets passed on generationally. Mm-hmm. So I really believe that we are carrying trauma in our bodies that is, not only is it not ours, it might not have been ours for generations, right? So we sometimes we try. This is why I think that you have to have. We went super hard talk therapy for a while, and now we're reintroducing the body back, and that's why I think you have to have both. Is that I think that there are energies that are in your body that you don't actually need to talk about. You just need to purge because they're not yours. So you could go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out why is it, like, what is the thing that's connected to this thing right here? And why do I feel that? Or you could just move that thing. Your body could just move that thing because it might not even be yours. It might not even be your mom's. It might be your great grandmother's. And it's just like living in your kidney.
That's a great point because, when they took soldiers with PTSD and gave them MDMA, Molly, under therapeutic setting, they would take the Molly 3 different times, talk with the therapist for a little bit, but rather than all these rather than years and years of therapy, they had 3 sessions. And when those 3 sessions were over, again, I can't remember what the exact number was, but 76% or something had no more PTSD when it was over, because they had disconnected their narrative about what this all meant from the actual hurt that happened. Yes. Which is exactly what you're pointing to. The moment you separate them, it's not about you anymore. It's something that happened to you, and you don't need to carry it.
You shake it off, right? Like animals, animals don't, like, if you've ever seen other mammals, when they get stressed, I take my dog Pig to the dog park, right? She's an almost 2-year-old puppy. She's adorable. All the other dogs want to eat her up because they just love her so much. And so sometimes they'll like come at her in a way that makes her feel uncomfortable. And she'll be like, rah, rah, rah. She'll bark them off. And then what does she do? Her whole body shakes. Yeah. She shakes it off. And all of that stuff goes away. And we don't shake as humans, right?
No, we tell stories about it.
Tell stories. We're like, oh, that meant this and that meant this. No, you don't know. You don't fucking know. Remember, you're living in an upside down simulation with a hole in it.
Yeah.
So you don't know. Just shake it off, right? Get some kind of, definitely, like, do talk therapy, figure out the mental model of your brain, and find a physical release to the trauma and stress that lives in your body and do that regularly. Because if you do, you'll just move a whole bunch of energy that you don't even have to look at, right? You don't actually have to examine all of the shitty things that happened in your life. You don't have to remember every bad thing that happened in your family line. You can just shit and get off the pot, and it's done.
It's the reason they have these rooms where you can take baseball bats and just beat the shit out of stuff.
Right.
At our local axe throwing place, they've got one of these rooms, and you pay $40 and you get a baseball bat and go in there and beat the shit out of old televisions and computers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Move it through you.
Yeah. I love this, by the way. By the way, I'm loving this conversation. I think this is
we're having fun.
This is good. I'll have you out of here by noon if that's okay.
Perfect.
Let's wrap up here with maybe 2 different areas to kind of go into. And I want to say boundaries. In the last 5 years, one of the things I've also learned about boundaries is I got enough clarity in my own head to stop placing blame on others for what my own discomfort about the outer world is. I used to always be like, kids, you're making too much noise. Shut the hell up.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with noise. That's not anyone else's fault.
Yes.
I can do something to get myself away from this chaos, or I can learn to just sit still in the midst of it. So I want to get your thoughts. Anything else you want to say on boundaries in terms of people you love who just don't mesh, their humanity just doesn't mesh with yours.
Mm-hmm.
So often boundaries are a way to protect yourself while also getting as much human connection with the people you love as possible. And boundaries also, I also want to ask, boundaries are also a great thing to place on myself, and meaning that I don't show up in a situation bumped into. I always use this terminology that things in the world bump into me. I got bumped into, I got nicked. And that nick feels like chaos, it's discomfort, it causes fight or flight, fear, fawn, all that bullshit response, lizard brain stuff. It doesn't feel desirable. It hurts. And often I want to manipulate the outside world to make me feel better. And I'm learning in the last 5 years to place boundaries on the way I show up in the world so as not to pass that trauma on to someone else. And I use trauma very lightly here. I don't mean that that's a severe, like getting punched in the face, but
a little neck.
It hurts and it doesn't feel good. Being a human being is often icky.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of things that feel bad. I want to just really, like, I love that point about boundaries internally with yourself, because that's what I've had to learn as well, right? When the most powerful boundaries that you can really ever set are what you will and will not allow for yourself. And then it's about what you will do about it, right? So being able to say, oh, and what that forces you to do is that actually forces you to think about, what do I need to feel good in this world? Right? So for you, maybe some quiet space, right? And so the boundaries don't have to be negative. The boundaries can also be creative. They can also be what you want, how you want people to show up and interact with you, right? How you're welcoming that energy into your life. So I love that. And then I also think on the question of, boundaries with loved ones and maybe with people that they just, their lives just don't mesh well with yours. I truly believe that no one deserves access to your energy or attention unless it's good for you. So I don't have relationships in my life that are not good for me. And I have no problem setting a boundary with some. I've even unfortunately had to do this with people who have been in my life for quite a while, and just the dynamic shifted and suddenly they were not good for me anymore. And for me to be able to, and it takes some courage, it takes a real sense of that I'm worth it, but we are worth it, right? Nobody should have to interact with people that make them uncomfortable. that make them feel bad, that make them feel gross. And you don't have to. You can say, look, go live your life in the best possible way, but this is my line. And healthy people will respect that. And if they don't respect your boundary, that's a rude thing to do, right?
It's also a sign that you probably set the right boundary.
It's probably a sign that you set the right boundary, right? So if somebody freaks out about, like, I think this is really important for a post-Mormon crowd as well, because in Mormonism, our boundaries were violated with
sabotage,
such abhorrent, like, frequency.
Yeah.
And like, I don't remember who said this, but when they said it, it just clicked for me. And it's this idea that what they said was, there are no boundaries in Mormonism. There are no boundaries that a spiritual leader cannot override.
Yeah. And safe boundaries are interpreted as unsafe. They're taught to you as unsafe. Unsafe boundaries are taught to you as safe boundaries.
Yeah.
To the point where as a 10-year-old kid, you go behind closed doors with a grown man who's just happens to be the accountant 2 blocks away from your house.
Right. And he's going to ask you about if you touch yourself.
Right. And in no place in the world would we step outside of that setting and go, I think I'm cool with that.
That's a great idea. Yeah. There's no way that goes
An
wrong.
untrained stranger man should sit with my 10-year-old kid and ask him sexual questions.
Yeah. So Mormons are really bad at boundaries. We really suck at them. And so I would just say, if you're listening to this, and you're Mormon, or you're ex-Mormon, or you're somewhere along that journey, there is probably no boundary that you can set that is too hard or too strong. You're going to go in the opposite direction. So and setting boundaries at first is going to make you feel mean. It's going to make you feel unworthy. It's going to make you feel selfish. And I just want to really encourage you to lean into those feelings and to continue setting those boundaries, because you have been so stripped away. Like, you have been so stripped away of all of the protective things. Humans need healthy boundaries, right? This just happened to me like yesterday. I was texting around. I'm trying to promote a show, and I text this one person, and we've had a very friendly relationship, but we're not like close, right? And she's kind of a high profile person. And so I texted her, and I was just like, I just kind of said what I was saying to people that I had kind of close relationships with, that I had emotional capital with. And when I did that with her, I didn't have really any emotional capital with her. And so she set a boundary with me immediately. She was like, I love you and I support you, but you have to put more thought and consideration into reaching out to me. I am not just here to help you out whenever you want me to. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you for that very healthy boundary that just put me, I got all up and in her space without her permission. That was rude of me. And she popped me right back out of that. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then she's like, we're all good. You're fine. But what that told me was, right now I know that person has good boundaries. I need to interact with that person in a certain way, or I will not be successful interacting with that person. And we all have that right to tell other people how they need to act in order to get the gift of our attention and presence.
I love it. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's move we've got a few minutes left here, maybe 20 minutes or so. I definitely want to get into sexuality. For 5 years, I mean, again, being a Mormon, I was told in subtle, subversive ways, and some of them very explicit, but much of it implicit, much of it subtle and subversive. I was told what my sexuality should look like, what I was told what an adult life what parameters that had to be within. I was told, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this, but there are issues of morality, which is really belief system created. Like, I believe God is okay with this and not okay with that. and so these things are okay and these things aren't. But there's so much problems with my own rational ideas of morality, and religion agrees with me that God seems to have done a shitty job of setting a morality, because religion itself is picking and choosing and discarding and wrapping its hands around. Some rules get discarded. For instance, the Bible says, if you're raped, your dad can go to the rapist, and the rapist can pay him a certain amount of money, and then you're obligated to marry your rapist. And somewhere along the way, we went, we probably shouldn't let God be the imposer of that rule anymore. We're going to discard God's rule, and we come up with our own logic that was never God's rule to begin with. Well, the moment you step into that space, I'm going to have a conversation about how did you decide which ones were and which ones weren't. So, but ethics to me is different. Ethics is my own kind of internal, weighed by the experts, weighed in on by the experts, and I take into consideration the data and the science of all of these issues as much as possible. But I'm inside myself going like, that's not right to do to somebody. That hurt them unnecessarily. That traumatized them unnecessarily. I don't need to do things that make me feel better if doing such hurts somebody else. And when it comes to sex, we were given so many rules about how we navigate
Yeah.
that. I was never taught consent when I was in school. I've learned consent on my own. I've chosen, in spite of my religion claiming to be the one true church on the earth, it intentionally didn't even teach me consent, because
Right.
it abuses consent all the time, and it doesn't want you to know
Doesn't want you to know.
consent. No. So once you deconstruct religion, sorry, it takes a minute to sort of set up these questions at times. So the moment you deconstruct religion, and as you point out, like now, fuck religion, I'm going to take into account science. I'm going to take into account data. I'm going to open up myself that I could be wrong about everything. Let me investigate the world like it's brand new again. I'm going to take every piece, take it apart. I'm going to examine it, and only the stuff that works and is good and is right am I going to put back. Sex seems to be one of the biggest issues for somebody who lived their life in a high demand fundamentalist religion
Totally.
and is trying to show up now, having deconstructed all that, show up now being authentic, being your best, healthiest self. And you have to run up against all of these man-made rules that were given to you, and to some degree for good reason, because those rules are meant to keep us from infringing on other people in really tender spaces. In other words, if you're not mature, if you're not wise, if you're not grounded, if you're not self-aware, these rules around sexuality that religion gives us are probably good. Because if you're not prepared to make really conscientious choices about how you're going to live your sexual life, you're probably better off living in the small box of religion's rules. So once you step outside of those rules, once you develop the self-awareness and the wisdom, the groundedness inside to be able to, in ethical ways, deconstruct and then reconstruct a new framing of sexuality, what would be your thoughts on that process and where you've sort of ended up?
Yeah, so I have a ton of thoughts about this, and I love the way you set up the question. So I think I want to start with maybe like a little bit of a sexual biography for me. And the reason I want to start there is that I think that it illustrates kind of why I wanted to do the things that I wanted to do, and then ultimately what I've learned from that journey. So Mormonism is a sex negative religion, meaning that it views sex as something that's bad. And when you grow
Now,
up,
Mormons are going to argue with you. Mormons are going to go, they're going to go, no, 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 no. It just has its time and place. And God's given us these constructs to protect us.
right.
What would you say to that before we dive into
I
it?
would say you are in a cult. You need to leave. You don't actually understand what you're talking about. Because there is a worldview out here that's called sex positivity. And this is what I've found, right? So sex positivity, if I could break it down the most simply, what it says is sex doesn't cause harm. Lying causes harm. Force causes harm. Manipulation causes harm. Dehumanization causes harm. There are all of these things that can happen to sex that cause harm, but the harm is not caused by sex. Sex is good. Full stop. It's not good sometimes. It's not good in the right conditions. It's not good if you have a super old man that you just met wave his magical hands over you while you're dressed like, fucking spiritual bakers in a Mormon space castle. It's always good. It is the generative life force of this universe. Yeah. It is our creative and most powerful asset, right? When I'm tuned into my sexuality, I'm fucking everything. And that doesn't mean that I'm putting my dick in everything. What that means is I am engaged in the generative creative world with my full body, right? And so I think that's kind of the framework, right? So I grew up in this very sex negative culture. I'm taught we were super extreme, right? You weren't supposed to kiss before you were married because there was this idea that was giving a part of yourself away, right? This is the virginity idea, right? This idea that if you have sex, you've given a part of that's gross.
In our scriptures, right? The daughters of the Lamanites are raped and they have their virtue taken from them.
Yeah. That's not, well, in that context, yeah, great. Rape is bad. But
But people can't lose their virtue because of something that happens to them.
Right. And you can't, and also kissing someone, like we have this lick cupcake thing, right?
Yeah. Bullshit.
Humans are not cupcakes. When you lick a human, it just gets better. The more times that a human is licked, the better that human feels.
Yeah.
The more times a human is fucked, the better that human feels. We know this. We have a physiological
need. Under healthy constraints, not healthy as in religious rules, but healthy as in consensual, non-manipulative, non-abusive.
I want this to happen. I'm tuned into my body. I feel the erotic energy of my body and I want to do something, right? Yeah. And I think that it's really, really important for us to move away from the idea that sex is taking a penis and putting it inside of a vagina, because that is a purity culture, virginity mindset that's trying to bar behavior, that's trying to control behavior. And what that does is it reduces an incredibly complex and an incredibly lovely and an incredibly long and wide spectrum of behaviors and activities that you can play and explore in to just one physical action. And it gets people hyper fixated on that. Because you can have sex and never touch another person. You can have energetic sex with a person. You can have tantric or sensual sex with a person, right? You can have sex and not even take your clothes off. You can have sex and take your clothes all the way off, right? Because sex is just the erotic exploration of our erotic energy.
Don't leave your socks on. Whatever you
do, though, yeah, for sure. Don't leave your socks on.
Don't take it all off and leave the socks on.
And so when I left Mormonism, so my wife, when I'm divorced now, but when I was married, my wife was the first person that I'd ever had sex with. She was the second person that I'd ever kissed. And I'd never really done any kind of dating or erotic exploration before that. And I think that was harmful. I think that was harmful to me. I think that was harmful to her. And because it made it so that we didn't really know what was happening. We didn't really understand. There was no education. There was no knowledge. And so we just kind of like tried to figure stuff out. And sometimes things worked and sometimes they didn't. And the crucial thing too, is that we didn't even know what we liked. Because you're told this lie when sex is bad until you have the right conditions. When you when you check all the right boxes, then it becomes magically good. What happens is that you don't figure it out. You're just going with nothing. And then you expect, once you've checked all those boxes, for you to magically be good at sex. And the truth is that no one is magically good at sex, because sex, just like everything else that humans do, is a skill. and you have to learn how to do it, and you have to practice it. And so the problem with having a view of sex that's negative and that is bound by all of these rules is that it doesn't give people a framework or a container to play with their sexual energy, with themselves and with others, in a way that helps them have experiences that helps them figure out what they like. So when I leave Mormonism, one of the big things that I have to confront is that there are parts of my life that are not really in alignment with who I really am. And one of those is my marriage. I realize that I don't really want to be married because I don't feel ready to be married, because my development is stunted. In some ways, I'm like a 12 or 14-year-old boy because I was never allowed to express healthy 12-year-old boy sexual energy. And so it never grew into healthy 34-year-old male energy, right? And so one of the decisions that I make is I'm going to, and it's not just for this, there are a number of reasons, but I'm like, I'm going to leave my marriage. I want to be a single person so that I can explore what works for me. I need to figure out what I like. And I really think that, and this isn't just about sex, I think this is about everything. I think that the way that humans learn things is through experience. It's by doing things. And then we reflect on the things that we've done, and the things that feel good, we do more of that. And the things that feel bad, we do less of that. And Mormonism and other high demand religions vilify experience. They tell you there are certain experiences that you could have that are sins. And if you do those things, you are unworthy, right? And
trust us, take our word for it.
And take our word for it, right?
Yeah.
Take our word for it that that's the case. Because what that means is that you're not allowed to just like, and so that also puts this really hard limit, right? Of don't have sex, meaning don't have penis and vagina thing. And so that creates this hyperfixation on this as teenagers. So you're like, I just can't do that. And so then you get things like soaking in Mormon culture, which is just that energy working itself out. And it also denies teenagers and young adults the opportunity to just explore their sexuality in a fun and safe way. Why not, instead of telling them, hey, don't do this thing, what if we told them, hey, your sexual and erotic experience is yours. You get to drive it. Here are some tools that will help you do that in a way that's safe. And let's talk about healthy sexual practices. Let's talk about consent. Let's talk about, there are so many ways that we could frame the conversation around sex. And what generally happens is that when you give teenagers permission to have the sex that they want to have, they usually wait. They usually kind of do other things. Maybe they kind of make out. Maybe they get naked together. They can start to play in this erotic space. And then they grow into having really powerful sex. So I was like, I want to be able to do that. So I very intentionally went out and had, and I'm still kind of in the middle of it. I very intentionally went out and had as many experiences as I could. Part of what I wanted to do too is I wanted to really learn from people who knew what they were doing, because I could also recognize that as a man in Mormonism, stepping into a sexual, like a very free sexual expression, that there were a lot of men doing that in ways that were very toxic and very dangerous, and that were harming their partners. And I didn't want to be one of those guys. Right. So I was like, I'm going to find myself a mentor. So I found a dominatrix who lives in Austin. She's she's world renowned. She's a somatic therapist too. So she kind of marries consciousness with kink, and it does some, and has led on some really powerful
cool
workshops for me. And I went down and I did like some sessions with her. Like I learned how to have erotic collaboration conversations. I learned how to spank people. I got to kind of play in this playground of human sexuality that meant that I would try things. And if I like that thing, and I've tried things and I've been like, I like this thing now. Now this is a part of my sexual play. And then I've tried other things and I've been like, no thanks. That doesn't really work for me. And that feels like healthy sexuality to me, because I'm not harming people. I'm having lovely connections with people. I'm having these are people who become friends, they become lovers, and I'm growing as a person. And I don't have to hide behind this wall of shame. I can just be very honest with what I want, which is I want to have a variety of erotic experiences with a lot of interesting and cool partners so that I can start to find the parts of myself that want to be expressed. And what I've noticed is that the more that I've played with my sexuality, and I mean that literally, like play, like in the sense of I'm going to go play with this. It's not serious. It doesn't have to be dark and scary. It's playful and it's fun. The more I play with it, the more I'm creative in other areas, because that's just an energy center, right? Your sacral chakra is just an energy center. And if that thing is dark and scary and you're afraid of it, then that energy is going to be dark and scary and you're going to be afraid of it. And if that energy is fucking raging in your loins and you're just like burning with the passion for life, that shows up in other areas of your life, because we're sexual beings. We are designed to be fully expressed, sensual, sexual beings, and to express that in just marvelous and delightful and beautiful and creative ways. And Mormonism fucking takes, like it does with everything, it takes this huge, beautiful human thing and it says only this part of it. And why does Mormonism do that? Well, it's because the founder of Mormonism was a sexual predator. And he used his spiritual power and his influence to force people and coerce people into having sex with him that they didn't want to have. And that is evil. That's an evil thing to do. But again, it's not the sex that's evil. It's the coercion, it's the force, it's the fraud, right? That's what's going on there. And so it's no wonder to me that Mormonism is so fucked up sexually. Look at where it came from.
Mm-hmm. Totally. What I would say here is, again, the last 5 years have been just transformative for me. There came a point in my marriage where, up until that moment, I had always been wearing a mask. My religious system told me what it meant to be a good human being, and I needed to live in those constraints in order for everyone around me, my family, my wife, the other believers in my religious system, to feel that I am living up to their expectation of me, for them to feel safe being in space with me. I've got to show being a believing Mormon. I gotta demonstrate that. I've got to signal that. And so anything going on inside of us that wants to be not what we're told to be is screaming and yelling. It wants so bad to express itself. And there came a point after I deconstruct the religious system, I stepped completely away. My wife and I are having really vulnerable conversations with other human beings that we love and trust, who are making it safe to just show up as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, conversations are naturally go to the taboo things that we were never allowed to talk about, sex being obviously probably the biggest one. Uh, there came a point in my marriage where my wife and I felt safe for the very first time, and probably more me than her, where I could just like open up myself and say, I'm not what you've been seeing for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I am. Here's what's going on inside. This is what I'm drawn to. This is what I want to be. This is how I would like to show up in the world as a human being. And she made it safe to say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all this banter on the internet. If you go look at like Kwaku and the Midnight Mormons, which I think now is called Word Radio. But if you listen to them, they've said times before, like, Bill's having illicit affairs, but he's so good at hiding it, we can't find the evidence, right? And they don't know what it is. They can tell that I'm talking about sex in a way that Mormons don't.
Yeah.
They can tell that I'm making it safe for people to explore that subject and to be vulnerable. But I'm not telling anyone how I live my life. But I will say this, that the ability to express to my spouse what my needs and wants, my desires, my cravings are around sexuality just the ability to say that safely to a partner, whether you get to achieve it or not, whether you are able to procure those experiences or not, the ability to feel safe to say it, and if there's something you need, the safety to be able to explore that, often solves the issue beyond the actual achieving of the situation. In other words,
Totally.
if your spouse says to you, "This is who you are. You want to watch pornography. It's safe. I don't care. You do you. All's good." Whether you actually, whether the internet's working that day or not, the allowance from the person you love and trust saying, "Yeah, you're welcome to do that," makes that really is the majority of the battle inside
Yeah.
it. You just feel like, "Oh, I'm allowed to be all of me and
Mhm.
pursue all of me, and that's safe."
Yeah,
And
and I think too that, like, it's never the fantasy that is the problem, it's the
Mm-mm.
secrecy.
It's the what?
It's the secrecy,
Secrecy,
right? It's
yeah.
the shadow, it's this feeling of, "I have to hide this," right? There are if you would not believe the wild and crazy fantasies that human beings have. We are
Oh,
so
I can
fucking
imagine.
creative.
Yeah.
We are so creative. And so and not only that, there are people who wanna hear that, right? And, like, I would just like one, I'll like on the subject of private or public, I'm having publicly illicit affairs. So Midnight Mormons, please come after me. I am being publicly wicked. Come find all of the dirt on me and just destroy me because I'm doing it intentionally so that you guys can see it. And I think that if I were to like speak to most Mormons, what I would say to them is, you are probably sexually stunted.
But you most assuredly are.
You are sexually underdeveloped. And the
Yeah.
only way that humans develop is through action. So you're not going to think your way into sexual maturity. You're not going to read your way into sexual maturity. The only way that you get to sexual maturity is by fucking your way to sexual maturity. And what I think maybe people don't realize is that there are actually a lot of containers out here in the world where you can do that safely, where you don't have to just go on the internet and find a rando from somewhere to have you don't have to like hide it from your wife. You don't even have to do it by yourself. Like you can go. If you're interested, fucking email me. I'll send you the place where you can go. There are places all over the world where you can go. They have very clear training for how to engage in that environment. They help you understand consent and boundaries and confidentiality. They help you level up. And then you can go into an environment with a bunch of other conscious, cool people who believe that sex is good. And you can play if you can ask for it.
Yeah.
And that's what you really need to actually start practicing. That's the thing that's stunted in a lot of Mormons is that we think that sex is bad, so I can't ask for it. No, whatever that dirty little thing is that you're like, "Oh my God, this is so dirty. I can't ever ask for this. Everyone would think I was so bad." Bullshit.
There's a Reddit forum for you,
There's a
right?
Reddit forum for that. There's a whole group of people who think that that is hot as fuck. And so find your people, like be able to express that. Don't get stuck in this feeling because the energy of oh, I can't tell anyone my sexual that becomes gross and toxic. And then that energy, it's energy, so it's going to move. That's going to move in some funky and potentially harmful ways. So don't let that happen to you. Acknowledge that you need to have, and that doesn't even mean you need to have sex with different people, right? If you're in a marriage that's working for you, you don't have to go and fuck all the people. I just wanted to do that because I'm a slut, and that's the life experience that I wanted to have. You don't have to do that. You can go and have like very, very, very fun, very rich, very creative, exploratory sex with one person. There's a whole range of things that you could explore.
Check out the Love Store in Las Vegas, folks.
Yeah, go to the
There's
love.
lots of variations of how to live out your sexual life.
There's so many fun options, and probably you know exactly what it is because you've probably like there's probably a little part of you that's like, oh, but I always wanted this. Well, go tell your spouse that, and then go fucking do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me wrap up this part of the topic, and then we'll talk a little bit about your comedy. Um, the moment I was safe to simply express what I was and who I wanted to be and what my desires, my wants, my needs were, resentment just vanished. It just
Mm.
like fell right off. Um, my feeling unsatisfied with the parts of my life that were counter to who I was, that was gone.
Mm.
And I think if you're a believer listening to this, have a conversation with 10 people who left 10 years ago or more. Have a conversation about what their life looks like now and if they're happier or not, and bring up this specific topic if you want. I think you'll find that most people, when they shed the rules of morality that religion gave them, and start to make real internal decisions that are still like, they still value consent and goodness and not hurting others, you're going to find that I think the same thing happened for them. Resentment fell off. They were able to live their life in a much more content way, and they were having a much more vibrant and fulfilling life.
Yeah, and I would even add on to that and say, um, the real people who are manipulative and dangerous with sex are not the sluts. They're not the people who are having lots of sex and who are sex positive and who are having conscious and deliberate conversations, because they understand how to talk about sex before they do it. The people who are dangerous are the people who are they have so much internalized shame that they try to manipulate things into happening rather than just asking for what they want.
Yeah.
That's where it gets really dangerous. And unfortunately, especially in the world of Mormonism, and especially kind of coming out of the world of Mormonism, that's where a lot of people end up, because they haven't learned how to ask. And so they're just trying to sort of like unconsciously manipulate someone into sleeping with them. And that energy is gross and toxic and not very mature. You got to learn how to ask.
Mm, love it. Love it. Absolutely. Amen. Consent, once you understand consent, and I think in the realm of sexuality, most especially enthusiastic consent, you should not just get a yes. You should get a hell yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but let's turn here for a moment. Let me get rid of the overlay there. Let's actually take this off. So let's talk for a moment about how long you've been doing stand up.
I did my first open mic in May of 21, so just over 2 years.
Okay. And you've got what's the name of the special on YouTube that you point people to the most?
Yeah, I call it the Spring Prophecy of the Fresh King Benjamin.
The Spring Prophecy of the Fresh King Benjamin. I've
This
watched it
one
twice. Love it.
this one is going to be the Fall Prophecy of the Fresh King Benjamin, and
Okay.
it's going to be different.
Cool. I'm excited to see this one way or another. Will this be on YouTube after at some point as well?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have I haven't figured that out exactly, but yeah, I'm going to have it filmed and I'll pop it up
Yeah.
there.
I mean, obviously we want to see these sell out, and of course they will, but
Yeah.
um I've watched your Spring Prophecy show twice. I've seen other little bits that you've done. I think you're, again, I know you. I consider you a friend.
Mhm.
I've known you for years, but I don't say this like, oh, I'm just gonna make my friend sound good. Like, from a just a professional perspective, I really think your stand-up is phenomenal. And
Thank you.
it's, at least it meshes with my humor. We all have different kinds of humor. Some people love Brian Regan, and no offense to Brian, he's great, but I have friends who love him, and I'm like, that this is not funny.
Yeah.
So we all have differences in comedy, but I find your comedy hilarious. It often connects to religious trauma and Mormonism, of course, specifically. But I wanted to give you a moment to talk about this show, let people know where they can get tickets at, and anything else you want to say about the work you're doing in the comedy arena.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be at the Downtown Wise Guys in Salt Lake City. It's October 13th and 14th. You can get tickets. It's a smaller room, so this particular room is like it's sort of a more intimate vibe. And so these tickets will go pretty fast. So if you're kind of thinking, I would like to go, you should get them before day of, because they'll likely sell out before the show starts. What I'm going to do here is I spent the last couple of years on a bit of a comedy journey. I've spent, I've been to Burning Man twice now. And that experience has been really profound and moving for me. And it's also kind of given me a little bit of a mission, which is to tell everyone that I am the true prophet of Mormonism. And that the reason that I'm the true prophet of Mormonism is because I'm the only prophet. I mean, there's lots of prophets. There's Warren Jeffs, there's Russell Nelson, there's Dave Watson. I'm the true prophet because I'm the only one that will tell you the truth of it, which is that Mormonism is made up. It's 100% made up, and we need to fix it. Like, we need to clean it up. The other reason that I'm the true prophet is that at Burning Man last year, I pulled out of the ashes of the temple a golden plate, which I have right here. And so I just wanted to just offer this to your viewers, because I know that a lot of us have been waiting for sometimes hundreds of years to see a golden plate. And here it is. It's right here. And you can come and check it out. And I'll even let you hold it. You don't have to look with your spiritual eyes. You'll be able to hold it with your physical hands if you come to the show. And there's even some like little writing on here that I found. And I think I'm probably going to use a seer stone to translate that and turn it into a new book of scripture. So
yeah. And that was a good bit, by the way, in the spring prophecy of when you did the seer stone stuff.
Yeah.
And that, phenomenal, by the way you tied that to Mormonism and played some jokes off of it.
And what I'm trying to do here, because this actually kind of speaks to the way that I view comedy, right? Because I'm serious when I say that I think that Mormonism has harmed humans for long enough, and it needs to go. Amen. Like, I mean that sincerely. And I believe that one of the most powerful ways that we can combat this kind of like dark, evil dragon of Mormonism is by making fun of it. Mm. And so that's what I'm going to do as the true prophet, because I would like to have a little argument with Russell Nelson about whether or not, who do you think would be better? A very vibrant, sexy 34-year-old who has a beanie that has an eyeball on it, or a dude that walks around in a walker and looks like Skeletor?
Right. Right. Mr. Burns is probably not the best person to tell us what the modern world, what it needs, right?
What it needs. Yeah. We need to take the bat phone that they've got to God. We need to get it out of their hands, and we need to give it to someone who will use it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can folks get tickets to the show?
They can go to just wiseguys.com and they can get ticket. This is, I think you're sharing that right here.
Yeah.
And get them quick, because they're moving. And if a bunch of people buy them, then I can open up another show, which would be rad for me, because then I get to have more money. And as everyone knows, you can buy anything in this world with money. And so I love to have money. So
yeah, why not? Let's have some more of it. Yeah. One last question about the comedy. What is this about? What's the pointing at the tip of your nose?
That's
going on there.
That's just kind of a funny picture that I took. And then I just haven't gotten, I need to get like some new headshots this one is a couple years old, but I just kind of like it. Like, it's a headshot that I have, and it's kind of interesting and fun.
It is like, as soon as I see it, I know it's, even if I just like glancing through, I see I know it's you.
Yeah. It's kind of,
and it points to a sense of like, I have a sense of humor, like something's going on here.
There's also sort of this feeling of like a little bit tongue in cheek. Like part of my humor is that I find a lot of funny in saying crazy shit out loud, but everyone knows that it's crazy, right? So I actually I like to give voice sometimes to the bullshit in the brains of Mormonism, and to say it as if I believe it. Like, I'll say things like, I was on a podcast. I was on a podcast with a woman a little while ago, and we were talking about stuff, and we ended up talking about like why. Basically, I just said like, well, that's because you're a woman, and as a woman in Mormonism, we don't have to listen to what you say. right? Which
Right.
I don't believe.
No.
I don't think that. But functionally, that's what happens in Mormonism is that you're a woman, so we don't have to listen to what you say. And so I like
Yeah.
being able to be like, oh, that's because you're a woman and we don't have to listen to what you say.
Right. Yeah, we even have a leader who said, like, say something, but don't talk too much, put on some lipstick and don't
Put on
talk
some
too much.
lipstick, look a little charming now and then.
Yeah.
You put on
Yeah.
some lipstick, Elder Pigman.
Yeah. It is, your humor is hilarious. I really like the way that you write, and, Louis CK, who I respect a ton, has talked I don't remember where it was, but he talked about, like, how much work goes into the delivery. Like, you think you can just think of something funny, walk up on a stage and say it, but the reality is you have to practice so much, like the delivery. Where do you anticipate the laugh coming? Then you go out and you try it. It fails miserably.
Mhm.
You adjust, you adapt. Maybe again, if you don't mind spending another minute or two with us, maybe talk about how much work goes into writing good comedy.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my one of my comedy mentors said something that I really loved, which is that um, comedy is the only art form where we practice in public.
Mm.
Right. So with everything, if you're a singer, you practice that shit beforehand. Right. If you're an artist, you do that but with comedy, you can write in private, you can do things, but you really never know if something's going to work until you say it to an audience. And the only way to say something to an audience is to be on stage in front of an audience. So that's kind of like, that's fun. That's kind of edgy. That makes it a little bit challenging for me. What the process kind of looks like is there's sort of this flow of, I'll have an idea of something that I think is funny. And then I'll try that out in conversation with some people. So I'll have this idea and then we'll be talking about something and I'll just kind of try it. And if I try it and I get a little ha ha ha, like I get a little pop, then I'm like, okay, that thing has something. So then I take it and I'll take that to an open mic. And what I'm looking for from the open mic is this funny to more people? And also, what else is funny about it? What else can I get to sort of fall out from underneath it? And then I'm getting their laugh. So once I've identified what are the parts where people are laughing, then my task becomes trimming. Because if I said 20 words to get to a laugh, now the question is, can I get that same laugh in 10 words? Can I get it in 5 words? Right? Because we often think when we're new or when we don't understand like good comedy, we
Mm.
think that we need more exposition on the joke than we actually do. Right? And so what you want to do is you want to kind of so identify where those are, and then I'm just trimming. I'm just playing. I'm like, is there a different way into that? Can I use that joke on another joke and just keep tagging it? And yeah, so it's very visual for me. Like I like to kind of see it up around me. I like to sort of play with the laughs that I'm getting from people. And then honestly, like the thing that is like the most frustrating about all of that is that you do all of that work, you show up and you do all of that work. Sometimes for me, it took me about a year and a half to write an hour. And you do all of that, and then you go and you do shit, and then you just randomly say something that is spur of the moment you didn't think about, and that kills. So it's this balance between like really dedicated and difficult preparation and then just letting go and doing whatever feels right. Because when you do that, when you're really in the zone, that spring prophecy, right, that I shared, about 30 to 40% of what's in that special is all brand new. I just talked, like that was the first time that I talked about it, because some things had happened right before the show that I wanted to respond to, and then things were happening in the show that I wanted to respond to. And so I had an hour of content, but I only did like 40 minutes of it because the other 20 minutes was me just kind of riffing on what was happening. And so you got to kind of like really hyper prepare and then just sort of surrender and surf.
Yeah, I love it. There's so much that goes into it, and I think you're doing a great job. And I'm really, again, I consider myself your friend, but just as a person who interacts with you in social media spaces, because we're both ex-Mormon, we do know each other. I consider you intelligent. I consider you have something of value to say, and so I bump into you once in a while. Um, I'm really excited to see what the next 10 years looks like for you, because I think that you really have the ability to come up with really great humor. And humor seems to be such an incredible way to convey to all of us collectively what is wrong and right about humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited. So
Thanks.
I'll
I
say,
appreciate that so much.
yeah,
I have so much respect for you. And so coming from you, that just feels like that like fills my tank up.
yeah.
I'm gonna go feel good
Um,
for a while.
Show will be great, folks. Please grab tickets now. You don't want to wait. This will absolutely be sold out. Just to finish off, saying I deeply appreciate the time you gave us this morning. I appreciate your vulnerability, because the whole goal in creating this series of conversations, I reached out to maybe 70 people to say, hey, pick your 10 questions out of this list of 80 and let's talk, is because I think these conversations give people permission to do something different in their life that they want to, that helps them to live more fully and
Yeah.
to be better to people.
Yeah.
And so thank you for the 2 hours today. I'm deeply appreciative of you as a human being, and I'm deeply appreciative of the perspective you offered today, of value to others.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, Bill. And I just want to also say thank you to you for creating the space for conversations like this
Yeah.
to exist, right? Like we monkey see, monkey do, right? We there's so much in the Mormon world that we don't understand how to do because we've never seen it. And so being able to see people in conversation about vulnerable and sensitive topics, and for that to be okay, I think is a pretty powerful gift. So I'm just thrilled that you invited me to be a part of it.
Love it. Folks, check out almostawakened.org. Also, check out the Fresh King Benjamin. Grab tickets for the upcoming show. And Ben, thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Take it easy.